Good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me, Lloyd Auerbach, and just want to welcome folks to come in. As always, I will be responding to questions or comments throughout the show, and that's what the show is about. This is about you asking questions, although fortunately this time, I can start out with something. Looks like already got a question here as well, and hello to everybody. But I actually have a couple questions that were emailed to me by a colleague in Scotland who, can't watch live because it's a little too late for him. But first, hi, Melody Quilts. The Heritage Square Museum in Los Angeles. That's one I've not heard of. Heard about being haunted. I've been down to LA a lot over the years, and that is not a place that has popped up on my radar at all. Um, I have to check on that. I will be down in Los Angeles possibly between now and October, but I will mention this again. We're about going to be doing our marketing in the next couple of weeks. Certainly by the next time we have one of these shows, the Forever Family Foundation will be doing an afterlife conference, mediumship, and other stuff, October 24th and 25th at the Hotel Burbank in beautiful downtown Burbank, California, with a special event, special dinner the night before as well. It will include a number of our mediums who will be doing classes, including people who want to develop mediumship. There'll be some other stuff on psychic development. I will be doing a couple of presentations on the evidence for the afterlife. I will be doing a spoon bending party or two for folks, for smaller groups within the conference. We're going to have actually 2 tracks, and we'll also be doing stuff on ghost hunting. May even be performing a little mentalism there. So there'll be more details coming. We're just putting together the preliminary schedule now, in fact, this week. So marketing will probably start within the next 2 weeks, and you'll hear quite a bit about it. And hope to see people there in Burbank as well. Um, okay. Are you familiar with the podcast Lauren the Mortician? No, I am not. Paul, I know you must be like online all the time looking for new podcasts. I just don't have the time for that. I wish I did at this point. So it's tough. Hi, Alice. Hi, everybody. So let me go to one of the questions that was asked by David Korn, who is again my colleague in Scotland. Hi, David. So he mentioned that a few episodes ago, I mentioned that psychometry was something that people learned fairly easily, more easily than other types of psychic activities. Um, and he wanted me to say more about that. And this actually is something that I present every once in a while. I'll do a class called Developing Your Intuition, really developing your ESP for the Rhine Research Center, for the Education Center. And psychometry is something I've been doing and teaching people for years, even when I was doing live in-person classes here in the Bay Area, and found with the live classes, that's what kind of came to all this, that it was something just about everybody was able to do somewhat. It was pretty interesting. And yes, Tamara, this is live. So psychometry is um, an ability to touch an object or hold an object and pick up information about it. You know, where it's been, what it's for, who owned it. Especially with antiques, you might pick up a lot of mixed, jumbled things because there just seems to be so many people who may have owned that particular device, that item as well. But it's not something that's difficult to learn. It's certainly a lot easier to learn than or to do than remote viewing. So essentially, the key to doing anything psychic seems to generally be to get out of your own way. That's the best way I can put it. Most of us, when we get perceptions, we're picking up stuff. Most of the time, our normal senses bring us stuff, and we just kind of go with the flow. If there's a little extra beyond what our sight gets, or an image pops in our head, or we get a feeling, gut feeling, or something else, we will sometimes try to take it apart. And one of the unfortunate issues with ESP, with non-sensory perception, is that we pick up stuff that's not always clear. It's almost like we're picking up pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but not the entire picture. The problem, however, is once you get those pieces in your head, the natural human inclination is to try to make them fit what you know, to identify them, to categorize them, rather than just simply spitting it out, which is part of the process for the best kind of remote viewing. It's the same with psychometry. People will get something, touching an old object, and say, yeah, just my imagination. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but unless you check on it, hard to know. So it is something that can be done. And the way I usually do it, because there is a question that comes up from a skeptical perspective, that if somebody gave you an old watch, something that, for example, might have belonged to a relative, a grandparent or something like that. Looking at it, you can probably tell something about whether you know it or not, you got a lot of information in your head. You can maybe make some generalization or statements about that watch and who might have owned it because of how old it is, for example. So one of the things I usually do is have the folks do put the objects that are gathered are placed in either paper bags or cloth bags. And yes, you can kind of feel it and know that it's a watch, or you can know that it's a ring. So you can make some judgment, and maybe even there might be some cues from the shape of it. If it's a pocket watch, for example. But I can tell you, I've got two pocket watches. One's very old, one's very new, and you would not be able to tell the difference between them just by kind of feeling them through a paper bag. So the assumptions are not the same in those circumstances, and people do really well, especially with unusual objects. So it's something that is fairly easy to understand and learn. And I don't have this up. There are a couple places, if you look on the channel description, there are a couple of places that you can download some information, some articles and such. I don't believe I have the psychometry step by step, but if folks are interested in getting that document, I am happy to email it to people. If you just simply email me, and I'm putting my email in the chat, the email for the channel. So you have a choice of, some of you already have my email, my regular email, but this is Ask Prof Paranormal is the email for the channel. Just ask me for the psychometry document. Happy to send you this piece on how to do it. So it is something that at some point I really need to do some research, more significant kind of control research on this. But it's really interesting how easy it is sometimes, and how sometimes I brought souvenirs from places, had them, they have unusual shapes, they have unusual weights. No way without looking at it, you just feeling it, you wouldn't know what it was, and people have been able to nail where it came from. So kind of an interesting thing. All right, and I just want to say hello again to everybody who's there. So somebody from Texas, great to see you as well. I also need to say that we have new classes starting for the Rhine Research Center, the Rhine Education Center, and that's starting tomorrow is the first of those classes. That is a class called Paranthropology, a cross-cultural look at basically at psychic phenomena. I'm going to put the link in here to the Rhine Education Center where you can find out about these classes. This course I've taught before. It's kind of comes from my studies in anthropology as an undergrad so long ago, but I've kind of kept up with that topic quite a bit. And the class looks at how anthropology looks at psychic experiences, sometimes in the context of magic practices, magical beliefs and practices around the world. And it's definitely a class that kind of expands your way of thinking about how people experience things and how they interpret their psychic experiences. Paul just mentioned the class on survival. That's survival of bodily death. That's Tuesday nights. I'm teaching human consciousness and survival studies, looking at the evidence for life after death, for survival of bodily death. So everything from out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences to reincarnation, mainly the children who remember previous lives. We talk about apparitions, and mediumship and and how all the evidence comes together and how it connects to research in the lab and other kinds of evidence. And also talking about how we have to really be careful about that evidence because people do misinterpret things all the time as well. That's a big important thing. And those are both 8-week classes. There is an introduction to parapsychology class. It's kind of a survey of the field that's being taught by Jimmy Akin, who has a great podcast of his own called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And then John Kruth, who's our research director at the Rhine Research Center, is teaching a course called 8 Important Studies in Parapsychology. And one of those is the Seaford poltergeist case, which was a major poltergeist case in 1958. There are a couple of other relevant cases that are outside of research in the lab that are interesting as well. And then finally, I'm teaching a 4-week class, which I do hope we get a lot of people coming into, called A Practical Guide to Psychics and Mediums, which looks for anybody who's a ghost hunter or investigator. Anybody who wants to do research with mediums, anybody who wants to just go see a psychic or medium, this class covers it all. How to choose a psychic, how to find a good psychic, how to assess the psychic or medium, how to assess a reading. All of that's covered. Even talk about psychic fraud in there. So Rockwall, Texas. Okay. All right. So that's a nice short class. Again, it's 4 weeks. It's actually a credit, no credit class. Most of our classes at the Rhine, we have a percentage of people who just take them for fun or just for information. And this is one of them that when I've taught it in the past, people just take because they're interested, not because they are necessarily going for one of our certificate programs. We have several certificate programs for the Rhine Education Center, and this class counts is credit towards that, one of those certificates. A couple of them actually that are there. So those are classes that I'm teaching. And what John is teaching and Jimmy Aiken is teaching as well. So I hope you can look into them if you've not taken one of our classes before. And yes, Alice, there is a lot of psychic fraud out there. Um, you know, here's the reality. There's a lot of fraud out there. We're seeing more and more of it online, of course, but there have been um, fraudulent doctors. There have been unethical doctors. There have been fraudulent attorneys. There have been unethical attorneys taking advantage of people. In fact, there is a whole thing going on in California about the billboard, the attorneys who are on billboards, um, basically what used to be called ambulance chasers. And there's some significant issues going on there. There are people in business who are fraudulent. We see that all the time in the news, people taking advantage of other people. And of course, that's not even counting the scams that are happening via email, text, and other ways, and telemarketing and all of that. So when somebody says, well, there's tons of psychic fraud out there, the answer is yes, but there's tons of fraud generally. So far, AI has not gotten into the psychic fraud game. I'm not going to be surprised if that happens, unfortunately. So that's a sad, unfortunate thing down the road. All right, let's see. Can you tell us some real ghost stories? Sure. So let me think about one I can tell you. Of course, I've talked about some of them in the past. Um, Let me think about a really a good one. Well, one I was just talking about to a colleague recently was a place out here that's here in the greater Bay Area in the town of Tracy, California. Actually, a little tiny town part of Tracy. That's about an hour and a half east of San Francisco, called Banta. So Banta, California, there is a place called the Banta Inn. And I have not been in touch with them in the last couple of years, so I don't know if there's still activity or if there's activities kind of resurfaced. There was a period where it was kind of not very much activity, and that was in the 90s, early 2000s. But the Banta Inn, which was built as a roadhouse, you might say, and an inn. It was a two-story inn and bar restaurant, kind of a bar roadhouse back in the 1890s. Kind of on right off the main drag. It's actually not far, not pretty much off of near Highway 5. And it was not only just a place for people to stop, there were stories about the part of the second floor being a bordello as well, which is not uncommon, as it turns out, for buildings to be haunted that were whorehouses, basically. They had a fire, had a couple of fires, one of which in 1937 completely destroyed the upper story. There was quite a bit of a fire in 1910 that destroyed a good part of it, but it was rebuilt. Then they kind of ended up, it's just a one-story restaurant bar these days. Really cool place, good food, good prices, the whole bit. A friend of mine who was distantly related to the owner in the 1980s told me about it because they've been having activity since the late 60s. The original activity happened shortly after the owner at the time, they were one of the two owners, the husband of the owner, Tony Gukin, died rather suddenly in 1968. Now, he was the bartender owner, manager, um, buddies with all the old timers, more or less old timers in the area, and uh, he he died very suddenly, and the regulars shortly after started seeing him in his corner. They used to see him walking around. So there were a lot of people that were seeing him. And interestingly enough, most people in the area were ignoring the regulars because they were regulars, might be alcohol, they just missed Tony, that kind of thing. But people coming in who had never been in the place before were commenting on this guy sitting in the corner playing two-handed poker, or it looked like two-handed five-card stud. And that was something Tony used to do. And he would look up and acknowledge them, which meant interactive. He was interactive. In the early 70s, Joan Borland and her husband bought the place. Joan had grown up in the area. She knew Tony. She was perfectly happy having Tony around. And what's interesting is after she moved in there and started running it, Dave would occasionally come in. He was an Alameda County Sheriff's deputy. He would come into the place and help out every now and then. And he continuously hear about these people seeing Tony or seeing this guy, and he just didn't believe in ghosts at all. At one point, he gathered photos of people of a certain age, Tony's age, Tony's friends, and created essentially a mug book and would stick that in front of people who had never been there before and said they saw the guy, and they picked him out every time. In the mid 70s, a little bit later, physical things started happening. And that was the majority of what was going on when I got involved in the late 80s with the place. Um, Interestingly enough, the first time I was there, I had spoken to Joan Borland on the phone. We were looking for a place to do an interview for Hard Copy, which was an old TV magazine show. And uh, that place was told to me, somebody told me about it and talked to them. They said, great, come on over. So I'm there. We're talking to some of the folks who worked there first, because we were there before it even opened. And the director's doing an interview with me before a place even opens. So right now there's only the chef, the cook is in the kitchen. There's Joan at the end of the bar, one end of the bar, and the bartender. And they had already told us about physical stuff that was going on in the place. And I'm facing the bar. A couple feet away from me is the cameraman and the director, who have their backs to the bar facing me, and they're asking me questions. And all of a sudden, an ashtray on the bar, a glass ashtray, picks up off the bar, like shoots off the bar, rises into the air, flips over, and smacks down on the bar, making a very loud noise. The director says, "What was that?" The cameraman's like, "What was that?" Because their backs are to this. This is right behind them. Joan and the bartender start laughing. I started laughing. And of course, the director said, "Hey, after he told him what happened, he said, can you get him to do it again?" And when he said that, a glass that had been put on the bar by Joan at my end of the bar, a glass of orange juice for me, slid across the bar about halfway, which they saw but didn't have the camera running. So I knew this was going to be a fun place for me to visit from time to time. We had over the years that I was going in there, which was probably about 6 or 7 years, we had a number of different physical things happening. But what was really kind of cool is talking to the number of witnesses who actually witnessed physical things happening, and the things we actually did see, were able to do more or less experiments with. Tony was very active with us in some respects. I was there with Japanese television in the early 90s, and they did catch one of the wagon wheel chandeliers start swinging and continue to swing, even though there was no movement of the other one. And the Japanese medium, being Shinto, brought over a glass of wine, liquor it was really wine, to offer it was an offering to Tony. She had been communicating with him from when we walked in. And when she brought it directly under the wagon wheel, this chandelier moving back and forth stopped as if somebody put a hand up. In other words, total loss of momentum and inertia, it just doesn't happen that way. So even if it was moving some other way, that's not really a possibility. I never saw Tony, but he responded a number of different times to situations that we were in. And just to kind of finish this up for now, because I want to get to some other things, one of the funniest things that happened was sitting with, this is years later after the first hard copy thing, I'm with a director, his fiance, cameraman, having dinner. We'd already shot some video with my interview and with some of the locals. We're going to do some more after dinner. And I'll tell you one more funny thing that happened after this. A salt shaker on the table started moving back and forth, not very far, but a few inches on either side, which reminded me really of old Abbott and Costello movies, specifically the ones where were in haunted houses. And the director, his fiance, and the cameraman are looking at this. Their eyes are wide, and then it stops. And I said, "Hey, you gonna interview yourself on camera?" And the guy's like, "I can't do that. They won't believe me." I said, "What do you think?" He said, "I don't know what to think." Another time I was there with folks who were doing investigations with me. We were permitted to stay very late. We had already done some interviews with a bunch of people on Friday night. We were there on a Saturday night doing the same thing. And on the Friday night at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there, maybe even later than that, I was in the restaurant area with most of the people who were with me. So like 3 or 4 people who had helped with the interviews. And Kathy Reardon, psychic medium I was working with, was in the bar area with the bartender and Joan. And I vaguely start hearing music in the background. Um, and Kathy comes running back and says, "Hey, come on, everybody come." So we run into the bar area, and I said, "What?" And she points to the jukebox, and the jukebox is playing "Spirits in the Material World" by the Police, which has nothing to do with ghosts, by the way, but still, it was "Spirits in the Material World." And I looked at Kathy and I said, "Yeah, very funny." And she said, "No, no, look behind the jukebox." And I did, and I reached down and I come back up holding the plug because it was not plugged in. The bartender would always unplug the jukebox at closing time, which she'd already gone through her closing procedure. It continued to play the song until the song ended, and then the jukebox shut down. So Tony was definitely playing with us. Okay. That story and many others about the Banta Inn are actually in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, which you can find on Amazon and is available as an audiobook too. All right, let's see. I can maybe add in another ghost story too later on, Paul. Let's see. If I will definitely, I'm going to check on the Banta Inn. I've had a couple of people ask me about that, and I want to find out if there's any activity going on. It did quiet down in the 90s. Jones sold the place, and a new manager came in who apparently, one of the locals said the guy's personality was very much like Tony's. So we think that maybe Tony kind of stepped back since he had a living person kind of taking care of the place pretty well. All right, Melody, how does a student have access to recordings of classes taken or signed up for the Rhine? Um, the recordings are available at least for 6 months and often for longer. The best thing to do is to contact John Kruth. You can send me an email, Melody, and I'll put you in touch with John. He can let you know how to actually get access to it. But folks who have taken a specific class typically still have access for at least 6 months, often a couple of years. It just really depends on that. Uh, the lowest the ghost story is one that is a favorite of mine as well. We can maybe get to that another tonight or another time. All right. Excuse me. Speaking of classes, my friend up in Scotland, my colleague, had this question. For someone who wants to get into parapsychology research, what would you say is the ideal background in mainstream studies? If they could have a major, minor, and a master's, what would they be? Um, First, I will say that the advice I had gotten when I had talked to parapsychologists when I was in high school, when I had written to Dr. J.B. Rhine, kind of the modern father of parapsychology, was to take any social or physical science undergrad and then look for somebody at a university who might be doing work in parapsychology who I could, and in a parapsychology program or some other program, and then try to kind of connect with them to see about going to that university and doing graduate studies. things changed a little bit for me over time. And I think today it's a little bit clearer, but basically what I would say is, to remember that parapsychology is a social science. It is connected to psychology heavily. It is also connected heavily to anthropology in social science. It is connected to physics and to the burgeoning field of consciousness studies. There are a few universities that do offer degrees in consciousness studies, and uh, that is, I think that if you can find a place like University of California, Santa Cruz has an undergraduate in consciousness studies. There are a couple schools on the East Coast that do that as well. If you're going to study psychology, I would say transpersonal psychology is the best thing for that. But you could major in transpersonal psychology and minor in anthropology or minor in physics. I actually started out, interestingly enough, because of my interest in astronomy, I started out in astrophysics as my major, my freshman year. And frankly, the math got to me. So I switched to anthropology, which was actually a good move. But I still had a year's worth of physics, and it has served me well. And I've tried to keep up on that field as well. So even if you major in, even in journalism, if you major in journalism, take some science classes and if you're going to go into research, start out in science classes in a science that does experiments, whether it's physical experiments or something like psychology with experimental psych. But keep in mind that part of that will be statistics if you want to go into actual laboratory research, but consider not just kind of diving into everything in that field. Get a broad base of some other classes, other electives as well. The masters, it really depends on what you want to do in the field. I mean, if you're going to go and want to do research in personality studies with ESP, you might want to consider psychology for your master's. If you want to go into clinical parapsychology, which is a developing subfield, counseling or doing therapy with people that are having psychic issues, then you want to definitely go into transpersonal psychology and kind of from a clinical perspective. If you want to do experiments that look into psychokinesis, you probably want to go into more physics. So it really is going to depend on all that. And keep in mind also that there are places in the UK where you can study for graduate work, parapsychology or anomalous psychology. There is the California Institute for Human Science, which has online and in-person degrees, graduate degrees in parapsychology or in consciousness studies with parapsychology. And again, there are places that more and more are looking in consciousness. So those are all things to consider. Okay, if you were in charge of selecting who you could be reincarnated to, whose life would you like to live? Some from the past, present. I guess it's who. That's a interesting question. Um, I don't know. You know, I that's a real. I'd have to think about that. About who it might have been that I might want to connect to. There's some people in the past who I do connect with in terms of just like what they've done and like what their work was. It wasn't necessarily in parapsychology, certainly, um, but I can think of people like Nandor Fodor, who I could not possibly have been reincarnated from because he died well after I was born. Um, but Fodor was kind of he was a really interesting guy that I learned a lot about through a family member of his, somebody connected to the family. So he's somebody I would probably feel connected to and somebody I could work with. I don't know. I kind of like what Harry Price did to some extent in the past. There's one of the writers I truly connect to. His writing is Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote the Tarzan books and John Carter of Mars books. In fact, I'm going to an Edgar Rice Burroughs gathering outside of Sacramento this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Um, and maybe also Walter Gibson, who was the creator of The Shadow and also was involved in parapsychology. Present, I'm not really sure who else. Obviously somebody with more money than I have. Kind of nice. So that's a tough question, though. All right. That somehow put a stop to all the questions. But thanks, Kathy, for that question. Appreciate that. So while we're waiting for more, I will say that for those of you who are looking at ghost hunting or investigating and maybe don't want to necessarily even take classes, uh, one thing I will say is that there's a lot of opportunity to learn about the best ways to do investigations, but more importantly, to learn about the phenomena. And that is that there are many organizations that have online presence and online information, and a lot of it's free. The Society for Psychical Research is one of them, has a lot of free online info. But joining some of those places, like the Rhine Research Center, the Society for Psychical Research, those are going to give you some really good background. The key is to learn about parapsychology. If you just want to learn the methods that ghost hunters are using, and you do it from television or from other ghost hunting groups that learn from television, you're making big mistakes. You're not learning anything about science or even necessarily the best way to do an investigation. You need to know about the phenomena, and you need to know about the experiences, and you need to know about how ESP in the lab connects to ES2 paranormal experiences like ghosts and hauntings, and certainly poltergeist phenomena with connection to PK. And there's plenty of good books in the field. I mean, I'm looking at several bookshelves of the good books in the field that I have right now. What I would recommend is that you go to my website, which is just lloydauerbach.com, and there is a parapsychology online resources page. There's a tab for that, and there are links to reputable, credible organizations that will have free information and other information. The Rhine Research Center, for example, has a huge video library. A lot of it's free right now. You can actually get into the media that way, media library for lectures and such. So you don't have to, much as we want you to take our classes for the Rhine, if you want to just learn something, there are many self-taught people who have been doing really good investigations over the years, but they've really looked at the history, what research and investigation has been done before by folks who are connected to psychical research or parapsychology. That's very important because there's so many mistakes that I see folks making in interpretation. And when I say mistakes, unfortunately, a lot of mistakes harm the clients if you're doing residential cases. So there's a lot of good information out there. You just have to, it's not hard to find. And on that note, I should also mention, and one I have not added to that list yet because I haven't had a chance this weekend, this past week, a brand new journal produced by the same folks that have Paranormal Daily News, which is a great website. I'll put that link in here in a moment as well. Just published the first issue or the articles from the first issue of a new peer-reviewed journal. And that journal is called Parawise. Currently, the Parawise Journal site allows you can register for free. You can download the articles for free. I have two. One I co-authored with some colleagues on an investigation we did, a poltergeist investigation. The other is a paper I wrote, which is very readable, about working with mediums in investigations. And currently, you can download article by article. Jock Brokus, who is the publisher, is working on a single issue PDF you'll be able to download, and also there'll be a print version for purchase. So the journal itself will be free online. The articles will be free online. If you want print, it's going to be available, but it will be it'll cost something because of the costs involved in printing. The producer of the other website, which is this one here that I mentioned that Jock is involved in and Craig Weiler's involved in, I'm a little bit involved in, is Paranormal Daily News. But I think you'll find that the Parawise Journal has got some other really interesting articles. There's an article by a French researcher on the skeptics. Takes real pot shots at them and how many of them have no science background at all. I think it's kind of funny through that. So always take a look at that. Let's see. The VA hospital featured Houdini this week and explained how he donated his time and money to teach the troops escape techniques in war. That would have been World War I, of course. There are some magicians that have been heavily involved in warfare. one of the Maskelyne family, a kind of a legacy family starting by in the 1800s. I think it was Jasper Maskelyne, I think it was. So there's actually a book on this, a book called The War Magician. And this was an illusionist who was brought in to kind of hide certain things from the Germans during World War II. So it's being made, supposedly being made into a movie. It's a great book, really interesting about how his illusion techniques kind of helped the Allies during World War II. So that's another one. So Houdini did help teach people, and yeah, I think it's really interesting because they're technically, I think the escape techniques Houdini had would have helped any prisoners of war. Although I don't know, I mean, certainly Houdini did the buried alive thing and had to dig his way out, but that was a little bit different than some other things. So take a look at Parawise Journal and spread the word. We're hoping that the folks will take a look at that. And at some point, we'll be also, I know Jock is going to be doing a Parawise magazine for articles that are, not necessarily peer reviewed, but more for the public. And there is a video related to the poltergeist case that my group did based on our article that connects to the journal. So take a look at that there. All right, Mary Prankster, rewatching Ghostbusters. The first thing Egon asked Dana after supernatural phenomena, did anyone else see it? And she says, I'm not crazy. He says, science looks for the simplest answer. That is actually true. One of the things that Dan Aykroyd did when he wrote the script was he had done research. I mean, his family's involved. His grandfather was a psychical researcher and investigator. His father, well after Ghostbusters, wrote a pretty decent book called The History of Ghosts. And Dan and his brother Peter were both interested in ghostly phenomena. Of course, Dan is interested in UFOs as well. Peter did investigations. A friend of mine was actually working with him on various investigations. And Dan spent a day at the American Society for Psychical Research in the library doing research. So, science does look for the simplest answer, but sometimes the simplest answer, what you consider the simplest answer, is not what I would consider the simplest answer, or what someone else would consider the simplest answer. It really sometimes depends on what you accept as possible. And I'll give you an example here. I was talking with a colleague years ago, somebody who was doing investigations, and he had been working with Bill Roll also on poltergeist cases and other things. And he was a materialist. He was a psychologist, but very materialist. He did not believe in life after death. He had other ESP psychic explanations for things. One of which was Bill Roll's model, which was incredibly complex. It required multiple things happening. And he said, I cannot conceive how consciousness can survive the death of the body and still exist. So the simplest answer is the brain doing this other stuff. And I said, well, that's not simple. If you lay these on paper, the simplest thing is I can write a one word, a couple word sentence, or, a few word sentence describing what's going on. You have to give me paragraphs to describe it. How is that simpler? So, it just really depends on how you're approaching things. Okay, the Estes method. There's actually a really good article. His name escapes me right now. Let me just see. Philip Morse, Morse, wrote an article on the problems with the Estes method. And there are significant problems to the Estes method. The idea of cutting off your sight and having white noise play through your earphones is used in the Ganzfeld technique. And that is to theoretically, and it does seem to work, it puts you in a light altered state. You end up relaxing, going to light altered state. And when someone is there's a target, and usually someone's looking at it, you try to pick up, again, go through and what's the first thing that pops in your mind. This is like remote viewing. It's like the psychometry, getting out of your own way, just simply spitting it all out in that sense. So with the Estes method, you have somebody who's not got the headphones on. The person with the headphones and eye coverings can't see what's going on, can't hear what's going on outside. Someone's asking a list of questions, and the person with the listening to the white noise or pink noise or whatever the static is will say whatever they think they're hearing, and then this is all jotted down with, in association with the questions. The problem, it's the same problem with EVP, is number one, there's pareidolia. Even though the person doesn't know, theoretically doesn't know the question that's being asked in that moment, the person's saying what they're hearing, and then the person or someone else is connecting the question to what the subject, the person, I'll call the person the ST subject, is supposedly hearing. But generally, that person knows what the questions are going to be. And there has to be, first of all, some indication that there's even a spirit present. Because otherwise, even if that person, the ST subject, doesn't know what the questions are, if there's no other indication there's a spirit present, it could be that that individual is psychically picking up on the question, which is what happens with the Ganzfeld, and is hearing in the static pattern. Their brain is interpreting the static in a way that answers the question, but is not related to a spirit. So there's still no connection between spirits there. You have to have other information for that. But definitely that can be a catalyst for psi. It's a psi-conducive technique, but that doesn't mean you're picking up spirits or hearing spirits at all. All right. Unfortunately. So I recommend Phil's article. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. And I'm not sure that I'm going to have it right off the bat. So anyway, you may have to kind of dig for that one. I have it in one of my classes. I just don't have access to that at the moment. So unfortunately. Okay. The 1990 film Flatliners and 2017 remake were good. The thing about Flatliners, I enjoy the film. I haven't seen the remake, but the idea of putting yourself in a near-death experience, frankly, is stupid and may affect, if people going through that tunnel, by the way, the tunnel is not consistent across the world. That's one of the things we'll talk about in the paranthropology class. The tunnel and the light, not necessarily consistent cross-culturally. If there's somebody on the other side, like we hear at the end of the tunnel, they may not be happy about you purposely putting yourself in that state. So there could be some negativity coming through for that as well. And Alice, yeah, the thing about going back to EVP, the idea that everything is a spirit gives a lot of credit to spirits, I think, actually. You need, it's like whether it's a single EVP or it's EVP or it's a single photo or video or whatever else, on its own, that piece of evidence can be interpreted in different ways. And you need corroborating evidence. If I get unusual fluctuations on an EMF meter, I'm going to look first for all sorts of possible normal, technological, and other explanations first. And even if I get rid of all those, that doesn't mean there's a spirit in my house. There are other possibilities that I'm not even thinking about. So there has to be some human experience. And I'm not talking about one where somebody said the house is haunted and we've seen a ghost here before. One of the things that my students of my field investigations course picked up on, or hopefully learned very clearly, is just because somebody calls you and says, hey, I saw a ghost in my house, that does not mean I go out and investigate. First question I ask is describe, but I then say, when did this happen? Oh, about a year and a half ago. I said, was it one time? Well, yes. I said, well, how do you know the ghost is still around? If there is anything to the idea that ghosts are conscious, why would you think that they're going to, if they not made themselves known, that they're still around when you only saw them one time or even a couple times and it's been a year, 6 months even. People talk about places that are haunted, and then people go into them because they see them in books from 25 years ago or 30 years ago, and they go to the location and they get disappointed because nothing happens. How do you know it's still haunted? I mean, if there were spirits there, maybe they left. If it was a residual haunting, it can be recorded over or wear out. How do you know? You have to know that things are still happening. So when people do EVP in places where there's no current experiences at all, and there haven't been for a long time, there's a much simpler explanation if we talk about simple, and that is that the living mind is causing those things either to be misinterpreted when there is static or something else, some other sounds that are recorded, or because somebody's living mind is affecting the device the same way if a spirit was present would have to affect the device to create that sound, that recording that's there. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to use the Estes method, if you're going to do EVP at all, a couple things. Then we'll talk, I'll just mention a couple things, the Estes method. So EVP in general, when you have a recorder, my recorder here, it's not in front of me, it's somewhere here on my desk. Oh, here it is. All right, so I have this particular recorder. I have actually a couple, I have an AI recorder also, one that kind of connects to AI. There are two ports in almost every recorder. One is for headphones, and the other is for a microphone. So if you want an external microphone and a digital recorder, you can plug in an external mic, but they all have mics as well. If you plug into the mic port, it overrides the actual device's microphone. So now the only microphones can be whatever you've plugged in. But if you use I think I have somewhere, I've got one over here. Yeah. This is a little device, transforming security through visibility. This is actually a plug that you can plug into the microphone port, which disables the microphone. The other thing you can do is you can get some I'm sure you probably have them in a drawer somewhere. Some of those wired headphones, earphones that they used to give out, and Alaska Airlines still gives them out when you're flying, or they cost like $2 or $3 at a like CVS drugstore or something like that. You can plug that in. So plug the earphones into the mic piece and cut the wire. I mean, they're only a couple bucks, so you can just cut the wire. Because you might not know this, but I learned this as a kid, that headphones, those kind of headphones, can actually act as microphones. Also, can work as an external mic. Not well, but still work as an external mic. So do that, cut off the microphone as best you can. It looks, and the idea being that if a spirit or your mind is affecting the device, it's not an acoustical sound. EVP is not an actual sound being recorded. It is something in the device. So now you know if there is some word or something like that comes through that was not made through acoustical means, was not the mic. That's number one. So I would do that even with the Estes method, perhaps. But if you're going to use the Estes method, number one, make sure you have evidence that there is a spirit present or has been present recently. Number two, whoever is going to be listening to static should not know at all what the questions are and preferably not know anything about the ghost story. And number three, if they do, randomize the questions. So there's no way to know the order of the questions. That's what I would do. All right. Let's see here. And Mo, I'm trying to see what experience it was here. It looks like I'm not seeing an experience you're saying here was at a conference. I don't think it came through. I see one that was retracted, but I'm not seeing in the chat an actual experience. So if you want to pop that into into there as well, let's go ahead and do that. Alice, that's why I'm so weird about apps and the word generator type of equipment. Yeah, people make them fit the question. That's not a great look from a scientific perspective or otherwise, for that matter. Um, this is the HiDoc a recorder, and actually it comes with a cable that lets me just have it hook in automatically to a USB-C port on my computer, and then using their software, it'll actually do live transcript and analysis as well. But I just will record and then just pop the audio into the into their program, which does a really good job of transcribing or looking for things. There are a number of other ones out there now, and the other thing I do for other contexts of things for transcribing is I will get an audio recording like this digital recorder. You know, if I'm doing an interview now, I will actually record the interview, and I then, and if it's on Zoom, I get an audio recording anyway, and then I pop that audio recording into Word because Word has a transcribe function. You may not be aware of that, but if you have Microsoft 365, Word, search for the word transcribe. There's a dictate button, but transcribe is not always obvious. And it does a pretty decent job of transcribing. And then you can have it cleaned up in Copilot, which comes with 365. So there are things you can do now with Microsoft stuff that's automatic, which is great. I've been doing a lot of stuff for work for my other job doing with that. Then you can get summaries and all of that fun stuff. So, all right, let's see. Again, the AI recorder, this particular AI recorder doesn't have AI within the device. There are now audio recorders you can buy that have uh, um, an AI format, some AI capability, probably an agent, agentic AI within the device itself. But this is one I got last year, and it works pretty well. And again, you don't need AI for a transcript, but you can actually get cleanup on transcripts that way, and then do some other things as well. All right. Other questions as we kind of count down to the last few minutes. So again, if you, for those of you who are interested in our courses at the Rhine, just going to mention this, then I want to switch over to something else. Please take a look at the website, which is just, I'm going to put this in the chat again. So it's just rhineedu.org. And the classes do start. If you don't have time to get to it this week, but you still want to take the classes, you can join the class. Typically, classes as late as the third week, and they are recorded. If you can't attend a lecture live, it's going to be up the next day. As I mentioned earlier, you'll have access to the recordings for months. So you can take it for credit or not. It's up to you how you want to do that. And again, what I'll be teaching is a parapsychology and anthropology class. I'm teaching a course on the evidence for life after death called Human Consciousness and Survival Studies. This coming Thursday, I'm starting a course, 4-week class, credit, no credit, or just for fun, called The Practical Guide to Psychics and Mediums. There is an intro to parapsychology course that's being offered, and also an eight important studies in parapsychology course being offered by others. So take a look at them. Our next classes won't start. It'll be like a month, only 4-week classes in August. And I'm going to be doing, I believe, a course called Presenting the Paranormal to the Public. So if any of you are going to go out and do any speaking, writing, any being interviewed, things like that, I talk about media skills, getting published and publishing, self-publishing, public speaking, all specifically around paranormal psychic topics. Part of, in fact, the very first class in that particular course is how to talk credibly about the subject without people thinking you're crazy. They might still think you're weird, but they won't think you're crazy. And there'll be some other classes down the road too. So lastly, I just want to say, may the 4th be with you. Tomorrow, of course, is Star Wars Day. And we can talk about how Star Wars really embodies a lot of psychic stuff here in a moment. Have you ever experienced a really mean spirit has tried to hurt someone, and how do you handle that in a residential home? Not physically hurt. There have been cases where the people were dealing with basically assholes, put it that way. Had one case with a peeping Tom ghost in San Francisco. How we dealt with that, interestingly enough, was suggested by their 5-year-old son, who had gotten a bunch of kids. He had just learned to read, and his parents had bought him all these kids' joke books, riddle books, the day before. And the kid's trying to tell me like knock knock jokes while I'm talking to the 16-year-old daughter and the husband and the wife, and the kid's like, Lloyd, and starts trying to tell me these riddles or ask me questions. And I realized how annoying that was. So we sat down for about an hour and we read from the kids' riddle books in a circle. And man, we were all ready to run, except for the kid, the 5-year-old, to run away from the house. But every once in a while I would say, and if you keep coming back, this is going to happen again. They never saw the peeping Tom ghost again. I don't know you can never prove that a ghost was there, but it worked. In another case that I had, it was a guy who, and interesting enough, the woman involved in this case had been seeing a ghost who turned out to be her husband. It was interesting. She was actually not seeing him clearly. Her son was, and didn't believe it was her deceased husband for a number of reasons. But when Alex Tanis from the and Dr. Carlos Sosis from the ASPR went up there, they were able to Alex was able to connect with Frank, the deceased husband, settle all that. Then he left. A few months later, she calls me to tell me that there's this guy here says he's been wandering around, and I'm the first person who could see him, and he's pissed off as hell that he's dead, and nobody could see him. So he's like verbally harassing her, and came up with a way to kind of a way of doing a visualization, something that is normally done for psychic self-defense or kind of a shield, a psychic shield to make you less psychic or to keep psychic stuff away from you. Slapped him in a jar that she visualized and was able to move him out of the house and take care of that. And then there was a case we had where, which is not an unusual one, where the ghost was trying to get this family, saying, "This is my house, get out of my house." We were able to hit him with a question that allowed him to rethink things and move away for that. So there are a variety of ways to deal with it, but you have to consider these are people. Ghosts are people too, but they're dead. So you need to appeal to them in some way. You need to annoy them out of the house. You need to work out what they need. What they need is important because that's why they're there. And that's what you kind of try to work with that. And the other thing is that the question we asked this one ghost who said, get out of my house, which has worked in other circumstances, is I had the medium connect with this guy and say, was there any place in the world or anything you wanted to do when you were alive that you never got a chance to do? And I surprised the medium by having her do this. She had no idea I was going to do this. And she starts laughing and says, well, he's thinking about it. And he comes back with, according to her, he'd always wanted to go on safari in Africa. So I explained that he could just hop a plane or just get there any way he wants. And he can get in the face of that lion. And even if the lion could see him, the lion can't do anything to him. They never saw him again because he agreed he would do that. He said, that sounds great. However, he had also been appearing to his widow, who had moved away she'd sold the house and moved away, about 50 miles away. And he was gone from her house as well for 6 months. And then she said she started seeing him again, and he seemed a lot more pleasant. So appeal to them as human beings. Don't provoke, don't do any of that. Be a diplomat, figure out what's needed and help them with that. All right. So next time maybe I'll talk more about Star Wars, but I do want to wish everybody a happy Star Wars Day. So may the force be with you, and may the fourth be with you tomorrow. I am back in 2 weeks on May the 17th. And then after that, it'll be May 31st. So every 2 weeks, we're going to definitely be every 2 weeks for the next few months, unless something bizarre happens in the world. And I want to thank you all for coming, for asking questions, for listening to me ramble on about things. And just remember that the past shows are all recorded under the live tab. So this is episode 72. There's a lot of recordings there. So feel free to tell your friends if they want to sample it and see if they want to come live with questions. And you can also email me questions. Email's in the channel description. It's also in the chat earlier on. It's just askprofparanormal@gmail.com, or just profparanormal, as in professor, profparanormal@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a good couple of weeks. Hope to see you all again next time. Good night.